Well, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is back on Australian soil, but not for long. He's off to Fiji next week. And reality is about to hit the government square in the face, with the PM facing challenges on multiple fronts: rising interest rates, debt, inflation, cost of living, keeping the lights on, and supporting flood victims in New South Wales. But instead of looking at practical solutions to that, the Prime Minister is still focused on climate change platitudes. Here he is speaking on Wednesday.
We are looking at long-term solutions. My government has changed Australia's position on climate change from day one. For example, what we know is that Australia has always been subject of floods, of bushfires, but we know that the science told us that if we continued to not take action globally on climate change, then these events, extreme weather events, would be more often and more intense. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that play out.
It is pie-in-the-sky stuff, nonsensical pronouncements that government policy can change the weather. It cannot. Let's bring in former Deputy Prime Minister, now Shadow Veterans Affairs Minister, Barnaby Joyce, who joins me from Cotingle near Tamworth in regional New South Wales. Barnaby, welcome. The government can't do a single thing to influence the climate or the potential for natural disasters, right?
That's dead right. I mean, it's so absurd, Chris. Look at this. Look at the architecture, the great heavens above us. Stick your head out the window and have a look at the sky and ask yourself this question. Is there a person in Canberra who can change that? And the answer is no. It's an absurdity. I mean, it's an absolute absurdity. We've got people in Canberra who couldn't change a tyre, apparently going to change the weather. I don't know how that works. There's a piece of legislation that these 151 sacred people go into the chamber and next thing it stops raining or starts raining or gets warmer or gets colder. This is just ducking the issue. If you want to help people in floods, you've got to build dams to regulate flows. You've got to build canals so that you can get the water away from areas in a hurry. You've got to make sure that you've got the capacity and your building approval so that houses are built in such a way as they can deal with floods. But to say that what you're going to do for people is pass a piece of legislation that's going to have zero, I repeat, zero effect on the climate, zero effect on whether the Rossi waves, which have brought in, La Nina, is going to change that somehow. I mean, why is it that every time the Labor Party gets there, they revert back to this philosophical green rubbish, believing that somehow that is going to facilitate people to get the mud out of their houses, get the water out of their houses, make them safer into the future. But when you suggest building a dam, they go, oh, no, can't do that. That's the frogs and the lizards and the moss and, there's skinks there, for goodness sake.
They are absolutely distracting people with those kind of platitudes. They need to be direct and do some of the stuff that you've just suggested. But let's be honest, Barnaby, was it a mistake for the Nats to commit to net zero ahead of the last election?
Well, what we made sure is that, first of all, so your listeners understand, there was no legislation required for the commitment. It was a statement by the Prime Minister. Never had to go through the chamber. So what we're trying to do, or what I was trying to do in my role at that point, was to mitigate us against excessive effects, such as a 2030 commitment, a movement towards methane, which would be devastating for the cattle industry, for the dairy industry, making sure that the path that they were following was not going to destroy our economy. That's what was driving us, and in the same breath, making sure we had the investment in areas to bolster up their economy, such as the Hunter Valley, such as the Pilbara, such as Townsville, such as Bundaberg, making sure the Territory, making sure that these economies were resilient, because if all the things that they predicted were to come true, then they're the areas that we need to bolster up so that we keep earning the money, so that we keep our nation as strong as possible, as quickly as possible.
So what should the coalition do now? I'm all for a point of difference between the two major parties. I don't see too much of it at the moment, but will we have a point of difference leading up to the next election between Labor and the coalition? For instance, nuclear and other measures. Surely we can't go down the same track that they're going down.
Well, I support nuclear and always have, and the policy has been that when both sides decide that they're going to not play this silly little game of every time you suggest nuclear, someone says, oh, there'll be a nuclear reactor in your backyard. That's not where the world's going. You've got small modular reactors, 4.5 metres wide, 7 metres high. They're building them, coming on the back of a truck, 300 megawatt an hour. So one would probably power town with an Armidale. I mean, this is where technology is going. It's not the Chernobyls which is 1966-68 Russian technology. Graphite modulated reactor, dual purpose, makes plutonium to create atom bombs. That's where nuclear technology is now. And I believe overwhelmingly, in the people I discuss it with, they say, well, why haven't you done this?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've got to move towards. And the next thing, if you want to point a difference, we've suggested Hell's Gate Dam, Urana Dam, Dungowan Dam. Let's see if any of those dams, which we put money on the table for, the Labor Party actually built. Because they always used to say, oh, well, what dams have you built? Well, and it's over to you. You have to work with the states, but let's see. If you build dams, you can regulate rivers. You mitigate against floods. It's really simple. Even I hear Perrottet wanting an extension on Warragamba Dam. Well, first people that came out, environmentalists, cultural issues, they must prefer the floods.